I think the kid from Philly had a little nastiness to him, but this kid kind of plays a little nastiness as well. And then, of course, the kid from Mount St. Mary's is 6'4", but I like this guy, John. I'm like, wow, I'm kind of with you. You know, he's good. I mean, he's got a lot. And the MEAC it's not a great conference. Don't get me wrong, but they do have a lot of good athletes in that league. I mean, it's a very athletic league, top to bottom, and you do have the occasional really good player that comes out of there. Now with the portal, most of those guys get on out and go elsewhere, kind of like this guy. And this is his third school. He started at UNC Wilmington, but man, that was a great way to finish it off. Kind of give us your impressions of the entire effort as far as getting this roster back in shape. And I would say quickly, but guys and gals and people that listen, I think this is going to kind of be the norm every year. Most programs are going to have a month to redo their roster when the portal opens, and that's going to be college basketball from here forward. But your thoughts, Whittle, on kind of the overall effort by Lamont and Carey and those guys?
Yeah, I mean, you never want to count your chickens and say the roster's fully done. You right now you're full, and I do like the pickup. And another thing about him is, not only did he average 3.8 assists a game, he was also the team's second leading rebounder. Is a 6-foot guard. So I know it's the MEAC and those teams, those NCAA tournament teams are usually the 15 or the 16 and right in that range. So they're not really valued as a conference, but he did a lot of good things in there in his year up there with that school. So, I think the roster overall is in a really good place. I mean, I feel like you're pretty balanced. I mean, in my opinion, from a point guard standpoint, running the offense, like you needed a guy like Jamari, because I don't know how much you have behind him from that standpoint. Jacoby Wright was, I thought, better in his best this past year, playing in more of an off-ball role, playing some in an off-ball role. But, he's probably going to have to shoulder a lot of point guard duties here next year. And we'll see how that balance and that dynamic works. It'll be interesting to see what else they do at that point guard spot. They're still high on Morris Ugasuk. But Zach Davis is an interesting guy to get ready to handle the ball a little bit more. Maybe, he was a high school point guard, and if a team if he's got the right matchup, I feel like he can go out there and play that position a little bit in some spots. So we'll see how all that kind of manifests over the course of the next couple of months.
Talking with John Whittle from thebigspur.com. Whittle on all things is the name of the segment, brought to you by Resto Pros of the Midlands. John, baseball. Okay, so it was like eating a sandwich. I'm going to use another analogy here. Where like the bread and toppings, right there on either side, delicious. Great mayonnaise, mustard distribution. Lettuce, tomato, crisp, delicious. Nice cheese, too. The meat, terrible. Like budding beef, awful. So it's kind of like one of those sandwich weekends where, Carolina wasn't playing all that well in the middle, but on either side, pretty good. And then the big narrative now, it appears that the Eli Jones move is not working now. So I want to let you take that and run with it. First of all, on the overall series, and second, kind of on, the move they made to put Eli on Saturdays and start Kimball and actually start him and play good for the most of the game on Fridays. Good, I think, has been fine, but just let us know about that, because that's something I can give my opinion, but yours goes further. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Eli, I understand the move, and I understand why they've tried it, why they've done it. It hasn't worked for whatever reason, and I think Eli. I think his biggest problem these last 2 weeks is he's tried to do some things that maybe he doesn't do, and I think that's been a problem for him. Like, why did South Carolina put him on Saturday? It was to give South Carolina the best opportunity to get some length on that day and have your bullpen guys fresh on Friday and Sunday, or use your bullpen on Friday and Sunday. So what does Eli try to do? He tries to go out there and give length. All right, so he's throwing. He's trying to keep his pitch count down so he can go deeper into games, and he's given up a lot. He's given up a lot of 2-strike hits. He's not really a strikeout guy. He's given up a lot of 2-strike hits, and I think that's something new for him that he hasn't necessarily done a whole lot of. And I think that going into that new role is messed with his mind a little bit from that standpoint. And then he's a ground ball pitcher. He's not averaging anywhere close to a strikeout an inning. And, now he's got a defense behind him who you got a new first baseman, you got a new shortstop, you got a new third baseman. And, if we're being honest, they're not that great in those spots from a defensive standpoint. And he's a ground ball pitcher. So now not only is he trying to keep his pitch counts down, he's also trying to go up out there and get strikeouts. And he's trying to get some pop flies, and it just hasn't worked out for him. And, I think that he just needs to kind of reset his brain and think, listen, let me just go out and be who I am. Let me pitch the game that I can pitch, and let the chips fall where they may after that. So that's kind of my thought on Eli. But that being said, he's found some barrels, but I do kind of think it would probably be best to put him back in that series opening role. This week is on Thursday. I don't know if they can bump him from Saturday to Thursday. I think they probably could, since he only threw like 55 pitches, right in that range. And so I think they could do that if they wanted to. And that's probably what I would do, just to get Eli back and be kind of a tone setter. But I'm not necessarily down on Eli so much, or as much as maybe a few folks out there. And his run output will probably be a lot better these last couple of games with a little bit better defense behind him. But it is what it is. So, but the pitching staff as a whole, the starters had a terrible weekend, obviously. But we need to start calling that bullpen resto pros of the Midlands, I guess. They'll come in and clean stuff up after a disaster pretty well. It was a pretty disastrous 3 days for South Carolina's 3 starters, and that bullpen came in and cleaned it up pretty good. So I thought that those guys did a good job, but the rotation stuff, it just hadn't worked.
John, that's a boss move. Whenever you can implement a sponsor into your commentary, you've been around the block. This is not your first rodeo. That is a boss move, and in the spirit of that, it is the Power Hour presented by State Farm agent Gary Patterson and Ryan Brewer Fence. Just kind of a follow up on that, because I've seen some of the comments on that, and you hit on the key part of the equation with Eli Jones, that really what you're saying, if you're being overly critical of him pitching on Saturday as opposed to Friday, you're basically just saying it's a mental block, because nothing gets easier by moving him to Friday. The lineup is still going to be the same with the opponent Friday versus Saturday. You're going to have a better pitcher going up against you in all likelihood on Friday versus Saturday. The defense is going to be the same on Friday versus Saturday. I think the bigger concern for me, while people are obsessed with Friday or Saturday, is, have people started to figure him out a little bit? Because he's not a swing and miss stuff guy. He pitches to contact. He's going to find bats, but does he avoid barrels? And right now it's been a few too many barrels for him. So that would be my concern. I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. Friday or Saturday, that's great. It's fun kind of second guess material. But really, to me, the bigger concern is, no matter what day he pitches on, he's going to have to go out there against SEC opponents and postseason opponents and figure out some of that magic he had early in the year as opposed to the last few starts.
Right. No, I agree with you. And I think he has caught a few more barrels. I don't know how many more that he's caught. Against Arkansas, he gave up some hits, but was able to kind of work around them. He didn't go deep into that game. Those guys battle you pretty hard at the plate and foul off a bunch of pitches, but he gave up 7 hits. But he had some defensive plays made behind him, because eventually a few of those ground balls that got through, found a glove. You go back to Kentucky last weekend, and he gave up 7 runs, but 4 were earned. So you had a couple of errors behind you, and there were some spots where your defense just didn't make a play. And on Saturday this past weekend against Missouri, you have Petrie, who for the second time just doesn't cover first base, and that leads to at least a couple of runs there. So I thought he caught a couple of barrels against a Missouri team that isn't really a hard hitting bunch. But those guys went against the shift a couple of times. I'm not quite there that he's been figured out. Maybe this coming weekend against Georgia, those balls that Condon and Goldstein and those guys hit. I mean, those might go over the fence, and he's catching them. But I'm not quite there just yet to say that he's been figured out. But it's certainly a fair point because he's not a strikeout guy.
Right, not a swing and miss guy, and again, whether you go game 1 or game 2, you still have to get people out against the same lineup you're going to face. I've been listening to you the last few weeks, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sense a little old school, like you don't sacrifice defense for offense unless you absolutely have to. Am I reading the John Whittle subconscious code correctly? Because there, in today's day and age of analytics, you know this, John. There's a lot of people that just say, look, you whether it's major leagues, college, what have you, you stick a guy at a corner infield spot and hold your breath as long as he's providing more offense. The analytics will tell you that's the way to go. But man, oh man, when the defense lets you down on some of the plays that you speak of the last few weeks, it could really make you reconsider that position, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I've always been more of a pitching and defense kind of guy. And, that's just kind of what I am, especially in the right spots. Now, I've always been one who will sacrifice a little defense at second base. And, Ray Tanner and most coaches will say, you got to be solid defensively in the middle. And, I'll put a bat there at second with the hope that he can make a 45-foot throw. But I'm excuse me, in general, a pitching and defense guy. So, there's a lot to be said for scoring a lot of runs, and you just have to, kind of grit your teeth and understand that these guys who are playing in positions that they're not very good at, or not as good. Let's say, I'm not going to say not very good at. They're SEC scholarship, baseball players, and some of them are best in the country at what they do. So I don't want to pretend that they're bad, but they're not as good as what they could be at that position. And you just have to understand that you're going to have to start winning games, 10-8 and not 6-4. And that's just kind of what it is. You're going to have to deal with, Petrie being a little bit, indecisive on, whether to go after a ball or cover the bag, or, you're going to have to deal with Casas, making a little bit of an errant throw, and Petrie maybe not being able to stretch quite right. A little bit slow on a transfer on a potential double play ball. Like it's just what it is. So, there's a lot to be said for scoring a lot of runs, but you're also going to lose some games 15-13 too.
Have we settled on, John, now, like the preseason narrative that this team is going to be excellent on offense, kind of middle of the pack on defense, and the pitching is a bit of a question mark, where it seemed like earlier in the season, you had solid starters. The bullpen has been consistent all year. That's been good. But here we, find ourselves at a time where pitching, can win you championships, and it looks like it gets a little shaky here right before the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of getting back to, a little bit of what we thought about this team during the preseason. Maybe not exactly, how we thought it was going to look that way, but about what we thought it was going to look like, right? Like, the starting pitching and what they would be able to do was always a little bit of a question. And, there was always some confidence that, there were going to be enough guys from a bullpen standpoint to be able to get you through. The fact that, Roman Kimball hasn't been a guy who can go out there and get you some innings on a consistent basis, that's a little bit of a surprise. So how you've gotten there is maybe a little bit different. And when you first started, when guys first got onto campus, it wouldn't be a surprise at all that Austin Brenling would be the starting center fielder. But it is a little bit of a surprise that, after watching him in the fall, what he's become in such short order. So it's been a little bit of a different route than perhaps would be expected, but that's sports in general. That's college sports for sure. There's always going to be some unexpected, some guys overperforming, guys underperforming, and it's at the end of the day, like, so much of college baseball is just about getting hot and having everything's click at the right time. And, South Carolina is trending up from an offensive standpoint. And, they've got to, they've got to get the right pieces fitting right from a pitching standpoint. And, I think they've got a pretty good sample size of pretty much everybody that they will have an opportunity to count on late in the year. So they should have a pretty good idea of how to do things going forward.
John, Georgia comes in scary good. I say that because they knocked the cover off the ball and beat the tar out of Vandy all 3 games past weekend. Condon obviously is a star. They do score a lot of runs and give up a lot of runs too. It's a big series for South Carolina. They're, I guess, a game ahead of Georgia, or tied with the Dogs for 3rd in the East right now. If you're going to get into any kind of super regional conversation, I think this is one you got to have, right? So tell us about Georgia, what they bring to the table. I know there is a game with Winthrop in between now and then, but since we don't have you, tell us about Georgia and what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia has certainly taken me a little bit by surprise this year from what they've been able to do overall from an offensive standpoint. I thought they had a chance to be decent, and Charlie Condon was obviously going to be such a huge factor in that team, but also in like SEC Player of the Year, National Player of the Year conversations. But they've been really, really impressive. And you look up and down that lineup, and you see guys like Dylan Goldstein out in the outfield. Like, he's hitting behind Charlie Condon, and he's been pretty darn good this year too. I mean, he's got 13 home runs. I mean, they've got 5 guys who have at least 13 home runs on the season, and that's really impressive. They don't strike out a ton. They walk a fair amount. Like, they're just an impressive, really, really impressive offensive team. So, they can be a little bit vulnerable on the mound, like a lot of teams can at times, but they can really make up for it from an offensive standpoint.
Whittle, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if are we taking another break? We're not holding them to the end of the hour, are we?
Yeah, we got to take one quick break, Whittle. We'll be right back. I was gonna come.
Well,
I didn't know.
I didn't know if we were working Whittle to like a mule, like we normally do on Mondays.
Yeah, I just have one more question. So
we'll uncomfortable moment of the guy that stays at the party too long, and we keep him at the party too long. So I was going to end in one more from me, and then I'll let JC kind of go from there. I look at it, John, and I see a team that clearly, like most teams in the country, Carolina has some flaws. But I look at it right now in the 6 hole, if we were to have the SEC tournament tomorrow, 13-11, a chance to even creep up into the discussion for a super, ahead of teams like Vandy, like Florida, like LSU, like Ole Miss. Like, I'd say overall, considering some of the, stubbing of the toe here and there, I would say you have to be pretty happy with what this team has been able to do. Would you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Well, if you read the message boards, the players suck and the coaches suck.
Well,
so
yeah,
that's why. So the fact that they're 6th in the league, I don't know. It must be all the great reporting that's going on that team, or something like that. That must be why the standing is so good. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you. Like, there's right now they're 6th in the SEC from a tournament standpoint, as you mentioned. They're right there. They were 10th in D1 baseball as a host site. They can. I mean, that top 8 is going to be hard to get to. Like, for South Carolina, that the typical resume for a top 8 seed is going to be a real challenge. You don't usually get a top 8 unless you're at about 19 wins in the league. And South Carolina did not beat Clemson this year, so they don't have that like marquee out of conference, series win either. They do have the win over North Carolina. I think it's going to be a real challenge when all is said and done for South Carolina to get into a top 8 seed and without making like a deep run into Hoover. I do think that in baseball, the conference tournament weighs a little bit more in the eyes of the committee from a positive standpoint than basketball. I do think it's been de-emphasized a little bit by the baseball committee, kind of bringing it back down to the scale of what they believe basketball conference tournament should hold. But I do think it does carry some weight. So if you go out there and win a few games and make a run, I think that can certainly help your resume. But South Carolina is solidly in a host. I think they've had a good year overall. I with the way the season started out from an offensive standpoint, I think that turned a lot of folks off on the team. I think a lot of folks are turned off on Kingston since South Carolina hadn't been to a College World Series under him, and this is the 7th year. So I think you combine those things, and I think folks just aren't quite as thrilled about where this team is. And
no, you nailed. I mean, I talked about that last week. Like the vibe of the fans is not going to depend on what happens this weekend against Georgia or the following weekend at Tennessee or the SEC. It's going to be how deep does he go in the postseason? And I think there are a lot of fans that are just sitting back and waiting. Like, okay, yeah, 2 out of 3 in Missouri. I wanted a sweep, but okay. You 2 out of 3 against Kentucky. It's good. It's good. It's good. But but there's still meat left on the bone, and we know how this is going to unfold. I would say, be happy to host a regional, which I think this team is in great shape to do, and then be prepared to go on the road on a super. And I've got a homework assignment for you, John. Maybe you could put this on the Big Spur. If you go back and you look at it, and I know because I've been a part of a few of these, in the last 5 years, top 8 seeds that did not make it to Omaha or super regional host teams that did not win 2 at home, because that's likely going to be the scenario for Carolina. It's not the dominating percentage you would think. It's not like the home team in a super wins 90% of the time. It's not even close to that. There have been years where like half the teams that won and advanced to Omaha were road teams. So just because Carolina doesn't get a top 8 seed doesn't mean it's insurmountable to get to Omaha. Win your regional at home. Please do that, because John's going to have to handle a lot of negativity on the message board if you don't. A lot. And then in the super, it's win 2 games on the road. If you're a good team and you're playing good baseball, you can beat anybody on the road 2 games. It happens all the time. So I maybe you can do a little analytics on that over the last 5 years to let people know that it's not only is it not impossible, it's done routinely where road teams and non-top 8 seeds get to Omaha without being at home the whole way through.
Well, back when I was in school, like I would have a tendency to like read the question and only digest about half of it. So I'll give you like that half digested answer. Like I can't tell you the amount of teams that hosted the super that went on to Omaha. What I can tell you is that the top 8 seeds in the last 4 years, 2 of them advanced to Omaha 1 year. Out of the top 8, that was 2022, and then 3 of those other years, 19, 21, and 23, of the top 8 seeds, 5 went to Omaha. So that's a little bit more than half in 3 of the 5 years or 3 of the 4 years. And I don't know which of those teams ended up hosting supers when they were knocked out, et cetera. So I'm not giving you the exact right answer to your question, but I'm giving you a little bit of a part of it. But you're right. Like it's not necessarily a slam dunk that all these top 8s are going to Omaha. There's upsets every year.
There you go, John.
Right,
Always a pleasure. We'll let you actually get out of here at a decent time, go grab a sandwich, continue the great work, and get ready for a monster series. I'll be curious how they pitch Charlie Condon. I mean, 459, 33 homers, 69 ribs, OPS like we've never seen before. You know, a slugging percentage with a 1 in front of the decimal. I'll be very curious how they handle that. It's going to be that's kind of the game within the game, what they do with that. Because as you mentioned, they're not chopped liver behind them either.
Yeah. Yeah, you start out with 14 home runs with Collins, then go to 34 with Condon, then 13, and then 13, and then 5, and then
Bronx Bombers coming in here, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
Oh.
Wes
Foley
Johnson's
Field.
done a heck of a job, by the way.
yeah.
was
The
really good
ball
hire.
will fly out of Foley Field a little bit, but it'll fly out of Founders Park a little bit too. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. I
it's-
would say Founders is more hitter friendly than Foley.
It's a yeah.
Because Foley, if you go
Wind.
left, you know, the dimensions they're pretty substantial. Like it's not a bandbox. You know, like
it is when you're
Founders.
still Disher.
Well, yeah. Well, it is when you're playing in the 2006 Super Regional and you go back to back to back to back to
The
back.
infamous call.
How often do y'all go back and watch that on YouTube? Because I would say
man.
probably at least once a month for me.
That's right.
I appreciate that. I don't know who it was that put the radio call on that, but if you go to the original posting, I think it's up to about 800,000 views, which I don't know any other Gamecock clip that's been watched that many times. 800,000 plus. No, it's I get people all the time to say, "Yeah, I was having a bad day at work. I just put that in, felt a little better."
Feel a little
That's
better.
pretty cool.
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
between
I think-
that and the Clowney hit, that's probably the top two.
The cloudy hit, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate you, bud.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely.
thanks,
Appreciate
John.
you guys having me.